Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Peter McCowan. I'm the Vice Principal for Public Engagement and Student Enterprise here at Queen Mary, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome you along to the rather fabulous and green Perrin Lecture Theatre for what is the inaugural talk in a seminar series on public engagement that we're planning to run. This is another of the various threads in the ever-increasing complexity of the tapestry that Queen Mary is weaving around public engagement and embedding that in all that we do. We have a very proud history of it here in the college, and I'm delighted to be able to have come in at this particular stage to help to kind of sew those various elements of it together. We have a series of lectures that will be running again in the autumn. So please keep an eye on the space to see what other exciting morsels we have coming up for you. And in particular, if you go along to the Centre for Public Engagement website, which is linked off the front page of the Queen Mary website, you can read more about the sorts of things we've been doing, the sorts of schemes that we have to support and grow public engagement here across Queen Mary. And you can also sign up for a very handy newsletter that tells you about all the various different elements of the strategy that we're developing and the opportunities that are available. So it gives me enormous pleasure to be able to call upon Fran Balkwell, who's going to introduce the speaker for today. So again, thank you all very much for coming along, and welcome to the very first inaugural lecture of the CPE. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I can't really think of anyone better to start this series off than Clare Matterson, who is Director of Medical Humanities and Public Engagement at the Wellcome Trust. And we are so lucky in the UK, really, to have Wellcome Trust funding for public engagement. And I think I always feel that it's such a prestigious funder of research. For them also to fund public engagement gives a great authority to the importance of public engagement. Clare joined the Wellcome Trust in 1999 as Director of Policy. She has a degree in zoology, and she did a Fulbright Fellowship in the States before working for PricewaterhouseCoopers and Hefke, and before joining Wellcome Trust. She's been the Director of Medical Humanities and Public Engagement for the last 9 years, and probably her two greatest achievements that we all know about are the fantastic Wellcome Collection, which has just been such an amazing success that she led on, and also the National Science Learning Centres. This lecture, its foundation of this lecture, came from something that Clare gave in March to the celebration of Mark Wolpert's 10 years of the Wellcome Trust, which was called A Celebration and a Provocation. Clare outlined some of the amazing things that have been done in public engagement by the Wellcome Trust in the last 10 years as part of that, and afterwards I said, you should tell more people about this. It's a fantastic lecture, and she wanted me to tell you that the origins of that came from March, and it is Wellcome centric, but that's why we want you here, Clare. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for giving our first public engagement lecture.
So thanks, Fran, and thank you for inviting me. And it is fun to do this again, but do bear in mind it's not a deep analysis, but I hope you will enjoy it. And then there are many more, I think, but there are a few perhaps provocations or questions at the end about where are we and what are some of the challenges. Get the technology in the right order, this is the right thing to pick up. So I actually really want to take us back 10 years, first of all. And this was sort of when I came into this role in the Wellcome. And there was this really strong sense that science, well, certainly the communication and engagement around science, was in crisis. And some of you may remember this report, the House of Lords report of 2000, which basically came out following some of the great sort of crises in trust around the mad cow disease, the way in which GM had been introduced, and the real public backlash, public kind of not trusting or not feeling that they were involved or had any sense of some of these big scientific issues that were coming forward. So this very important report came out, and it was sort of the early denouncement of what I guess we now call the deficit model, i.e. if you tell them more they will love it, which was very clearly not necessarily working. And there was this little phrase in the report about how science and scientists need to think about the public and approach the public, and the words were with a kind of new sense of humility. And I think a lot of organisations, certainly the Wellcome Trust and many of the scientists that we funded, thought really, really long and hard about this. Around the same time, a few years later, there was a big report that came out from the Department for Education, which was sort of saying slightly different things, but chimed very much with that House of Lords report, which was about the crisis that there was in terms of the number of young people going into what we now call STEM subjects, science, engineering, technology, mathematics, particularly physics, chemistry, and even biology was suffering. Biology wasn't going down like the others, but it was sort of just plateauing. Physics, huge dips, chemistry dips, and mathematics, for slightly different reasons, went through really a sort of precipice almost. And there were various surveys done as to, well, what's this all about? And students kind of saying, well, it's not very interesting. How can science not be interesting? What is going wrong here with what was going on with students? And then, of course, the great MMR debate, which is really, really interesting now, of course, because we now know the consequences of this. We now know when we see people queuing up in areas of England and in Cardiff, we now know what this actually then led to. So it goes to show how serious some of these issues are. So that's 10 years back. And so the rest of what I'm going to talk about is actually a bit of a celebration. This is where we were. And I think there is a real sense that these things were real wake-up calls in all sorts of ways and have led to many different ways of experimenting, but also engaging in many different through many different routes with public audiences. The first one I want to talk about, and Fran just mentioned it, is this, and I think it's slightly been our zeitgeist in the Wellcome because of who Henry Wellcome was, because he had this enormous collection and thought very much in this broad way about well-being and thought about it as well as through the science, but also sort of through the arts and humanities, embedding science much more richly in the kind of idea of kind of our cultural identity and who we are and what we do. And that was really quite the strong idea behind Wellcome Collection. So you're going to see now a series of numbers. So numbers are then sort of just points in time of where we are then. So this number here is since we opened in Wellcome Collection, if you've been, this is the number of what we call our temporary and special exhibitions that we have had on these exceedingly diverse topics. So from the early days when we opened, really exploring some of the crystallography and then the sort of textile industry that actually then developed from that. And that led to some great exhibitions in the 1951 exhibition at the 1851, 18 or 19, there's a historian in the room. Exhibitions, and this was a wonderful, and the scientists really loved this in particular. It was a very sciencey show, but it had that, it sort of showed how it had really inspired different industries and how there was this sort of huge leap forward in sort of scientific development. And then the sorts of shows we've done, very, very different. This one, High Society, how mind-altering drugs have really affected our minds through history and culture. And the really fantastic thing about this one, it attracted a completely different type of audience to that first one. This is one of our big learnings, how people are very topic-driven. They will come into an exhibition because they are fascinated by the topic. So I said a lot of scientists and actually textile people came to that first one, and a lot of people high on drugs actually came to this one. So it was a particular challenge for our visitor services people. And then one of our most recent exhibitions, and interestingly, this has been our most popular exhibition ever, actually, which was from a private collector who has collected artworks and objects broadly linked to that very sort of something which will happen to us all, but none of us have experienced, sort of death, and very much therefore exploring, and we had a lot of events around it, kind of exploring what death means to us today in our contemporary culture. So that we have, as you can see, we have sort of woven in ideas of science into this tapestry, but not had necessarily kind of science as the centre and as the core. But what we've learnt enormously is, as I say, we get very, very different kinds of audiences drawn in by those very different kinds of topics. So this is the number we're up to in Wellcome Collection in terms of the number of visitors we've had through the door. And we were expecting after 5 years to be at around the 500,000 mark in terms of our early predictions on numbers. So this is utterly fantastic for us. We're not a huge venue. We're sort of slightly off the beaten track, although the Euston Road is getting better. So I think what has proven to us is that there is a real appetite and a real interest. And, and these are the sorts of things people get fascinated. So we have a whole series of exhibitions, exhibits, bodies doing different things that we have had going on over the past number of years in Wellcome Collection. But this is actually a pretty small number, and here's a very big number. And it's also very clear we can have these wonderful galleries, but actually if you look at the where people are now, people are going digital. Young people in particular, and I'm going to present a few numbers from the latest Wellcome Monitor, and this is a major survey of adults and separately young people looking at some of their views and attitudes and understanding and knowledge around medical science. And what's interesting, or perhaps not surprising, is that young people, even compared to 3 years ago, the internet and the web is where now young people are going and having their first experiences, not going to look up information, but their first experiences of science. A few years ago it was the television. It's still the television for adults. They still see science first on the television. Young people now are seeing it on the web, so there's a difference and a split. So we realised a number of years ago that actually we had to understand this area better. And I'm still not sure that we completely understand it. We've just started an initiative, and we want to do more on it. We will work more on it, where we work with the gaming industry to actually see how we can infiltrate science and scientific ideas. Gaming industry has lots of money. We've got lots of scientists. So we think that there's a bit of a matchmaking thing we can do. And we were inspired to do this because this 20 million number, we put out a number of years ago with Channel 4 this game called Sneeze. You can still find it. It's great fun, actually, where the object of the game, actually, is to be a little person, and then you're in lots of different environments there, and you have to find the best place to sneeze so that you sneeze, and your sneeze will affect as many people as possible, and they will sneeze, and they will affect more, and how many different levels you can get to. We put this out unknowingly, of course, just at the same time as the first bird flu a few years ago was hitting all the papers, and it was great. We got accused in the New York Times for being sort of not taking things quite seriously enough as a major institution, and so we had great fun saying that it's clearly just showed that the Americans lacked a great sense of irony in terms of how to engage with the public. So that was an enormous success for us in terms of hits, but there are big questions about what kind of science is this teaching? Is this a way to get science and scientific ideas across? And I know you do a lot of games here in the centre of the cell, and I think one of the things we want to do over the next number of years with partners is to really explore that area further and have a deeper and better understanding of it. So the other thing that we've been incredibly proud of, and we're not necessarily known so much for, is our funding of the arts. And it's through the arts, actually, that I think we have had some of the greatest insights in thinking about how in different ways we can engage with different publics. And the arts can be quite a provocative take on life, and quite a provocative way, quite a challenging way of sometimes looking at issues that have scientific elements to them. This is a photograph from a small arts award that we funded by somebody called Mark Neville. And this was a photo documentary book that he put together, which was investigating issues around toxology in Corby. If people remember that, there was a big aluminium spill, and then aluminium was taken out of the town, and then there were all these children born with deformities, and the town was convinced it was something to do with that, but of course it was all hidden, and there were lots of denials. And then over the years, various people in the town were campaigning, and they discovered that yes, it was because this was sort of shipped out in lorries overnight, and it was sort of getting into the environment. And so a lot of young people were born with these deformities. So he did this very, very sensitive photo documentary that then went to local authorities with the history. So it was quite a personal piece. It wasn't a commercial piece, but it had quite a profound impact on what happened locally. The other one is around very, very young children, and this was a magazine which we funded with a small People Awards, which you can now go and buy. So that's really great. People can now go buy this in the shops for primary school children, which basically just has these great games and fun things to do and cartoons and characters, but for the very, very young youngsters. And then my last one here is, this is by an artist called, so the scientist is called Frank Kelly, Professor Frank Kelly, and the artist is Dryden Goodwin. And this was around pollution in London. Frank does a lot of work around pollution in London and some of the London streets. And he worked with this artist, and this image, at the same time there were debates on pollution levels in London, this image, it breathes very slowly. It was portrayed on the South Bank, so you could see it from the Houses of Parliament looking over. And in sight of that image of a young child breathing, these debates were held and they had cocktails. So once again, it was quite small but very, very powerful and quite poignant and a rather beautiful exposition, and rather a challenge as well to therefore the politicians and to the scientists. But as I said before, television is the key, actually. It has been the key. And a number of years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, I read from those big polls, and this was the one done by the Office of Science and Technology at the time, and it showed that actually people, adults, get their first experience of a new scientific issue through the television. It might be news, it might be documentary, it might be watching something on Casualty. But it was interesting to me, that's where they got it first. And we knew nothing about television. We didn't know, and I thought, how can we be a major public engagement organisation when we actually don't even know the first thing about the main organisations, the broadcast industry, where people get their first information, their first hint. So we did a big piece of work to find out how the industry worked. And it was very clear that this is an industry that has a lot of money. This is an industry which is looking for ideas. So the next question was, how can we unlock some of that money? We don't want to put lots of our money in. So this number is the amount of money we have managed to unlock with very small grants, £10,000 grants, to do small, for production companies to work with scientists, to work on pitches, which then could be pitched into the big television, BBC One, Channel 4, ITV. They still are the channels that everybody watches. Pitch that in so the controllers can then have a grasp of what that idea is, and then they will go on and fund it. So over the years, we've put just under £3 million into this, and this is at our best estimate of the amount of money we've unlocked. And now you can sit back just for a couple of minutes and watch some of those programmes, some which you will recognise, some you might not, which have come about because of those early development awards.
Physical characteristics: age 28, Race Caucasian, height 6 feet tall, blue eyes, light brown hair.
I donated about 500 times.
Dozens of women got his sperm. There could be dozens of siblings.
Jeffrey?
Yep.
It's Joellen.
Oh my God, is that really you?
150 years after the publication of Darwin's revolutionary book, modern genetics has confirmed its fundamental truth. All life is related.
It's huge. Ah, it's taken the breathing apparatus and made a weapon out of it.
So tonight, and this is not for the faint-hearted, we have a live link to Theatre 2 where neurosurgeon Mr. Paul Grundy will remove a suspected tumour from a patient's brain.
When I self-harm, it's like you're in a scary film and you finally come to the end where something happy happens and you're okay again.
It's a bit like Russian roulette with two revolvers, and you've got one revolver called treatment and the other revolver which is no treatment. And it's like that for the patient. And you have to decide which to go for.
Why are the strongest now the most vulnerable? I don't want you talking about plague.
It is a plague, though, isn't it?
Today is the day, Arthur. Who's the new girl?
Your husband was in the army?
No, theatre.
Actor. I was in the police. Detective sergeant for over 30 years.
You get the idea. There were some wonderful programs now, and as I say, this was really quite an eye-opener for me to know that this was a way of actually working with the broadcast industry to actually just they are looking for the ideas. You know, this is a very creative industry, and they need the ideas. They have the money. So if you can put really smart people together, production people, scientists who've got great content, and they pitch it in, you can get some great telly made. So that has been an enormous success for us. I thought I'd just mention on the back of that, and this was partly, as Fran said, this was for Mark Walpert. And Mark, whilst he was at the Trust, actually really changed the Trust's attitude, if you like, to the media, recognising that this is, the media is something that we really have to engage with seriously, take seriously. And Mark was a great advocate for that, invested in that in terms of people. And this was sort of almost our best day ever when we got the headline in The Guardian there about the work that we did around open access, but we also got the image from our exhibition, which was open on Wellcome Collection at the same time, on brain. So this was, we won't get this again in a day where we get both the image and the headline, but this was a really exciting day for us to kind of show that all that effort and investment that we put in how do we best work with the media was beginning to pay off. The other thing that has been really important to us is science education. Science education because we need great scientists of the future. Science education because we need a population which, that can engage increasingly in all different walks of their life with the sort of complexity of today's sort of science and technology world. And this number is straight from the Wellcome Monitor, and this is the number or the percentage of young people that say, having a good science teacher encouraged me in my science. And I don't know about you, but I certainly can remember my really good teachers, and they are the ones that really made a difference and made me interested and excited about science. And so one of the things, as Fran said, I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers for a number of years, and it became very clear to me when I was there that they invested heavily in professional development. They had a really nice place that you could go to, really high quality sort of lectures and tutorials, people coming in. You went there, you spent 3 or 4 days there, you met people that you'd never met before from other areas of the company, sometimes other areas of the world, and they were very intensive, but they stayed with you. They made a big difference in terms of confidence, in terms of content. And there were a lot of reports that science teachers from leaving school and leaving university then do not have any subject-specific science training. Patches here and there, given how science moves on, how science changes, how it's in the media, how it's all around us, clearly a major problem. So we invested heavily in the National Science Learning Centre. We got government involved, we got industry partners involved, and since 2008, this is the number of teachers that have been on those residential courses. There are more that have been on some of the smaller courses at the regional centres. If you haven't been there, do go up and have a look. It's a great place at the National Centre. 62% now of all secondary schools, state secondary schools, have sent somebody there. I'm going to flip over the next ones actually, because I want to stick on with the science story, the science teacher story. And this is from the Wellcome Monitor, and this tells us, as of the data that just came out, this is the percentage of pupils that report to us. This is from 14 to 16 that tell us they enjoy science in class. So if you go back to some of those earlier, sort of 10, 12 years ago, things are changing and we are beginning to make a difference, not just through the National Science Learning Centre, but I do believe that has played its role. And you can see that these are biology, chemistry and physics, where we were in the early 90s and where we are today. And the latest numbers of young people doing GCSEs has gone up again. And we seem to be going now on a much more upward trajectory. So all the indicators like the Monitor, the real indicators of young people opting to do science, it feels like things are now going in the directions that we want them to go. Another really critical part of my job is to think about how, at the end of the day, all of this knowledge is locked up in the scientists, in the sorts of people in you who work here, scientists all over the country. And we work hard to think, how can we work with and encourage our scientists that we fund to engage with the public, but also to do it in a way which is done as a professional part of their role, not as a hobby or not as just as an add-on. Because my belief in this, that actually is that being a scientist, there are many different elements to it, and one professional part of it is that sort of engagement element. And nothing drives me more mad, and I love Nancy Rothwell. She was on the radio the other day, I don't know if you heard her, and she talked about that bit, and she's very good at it as being her hobby. And I felt that actually undermines it, because actually to do it well, you are competing with the likes of the television, with the BBC, with the museums. It has to be done well, and it has to be invested in properly. People have to be trained, people have to work with other professionals, people have to have role models. So I think this is really important. So we've done, this is the number of people that we have worked with thus far, and we've done a range of things. We did a big programme around the 75th anniversary where we worked with some of our major centres and we put training programmes on for them, and then they worked up programmes of activity. And I have to say, I've had the best responses back from the director of those centres that I've ever had than just kind of putting on the odd training course here or media course there. Having it focused around a real idea and a real opportunity has been fantastic. And these are some of the things that happened. Obviously, another jewel in our crown is actually the jewel in your crown, which is what goes on here. the centre of the cell, and it's a little bit personal, but I'll tell you anyway. I brought my children, and they're 10 now, so they must have been, 7 then, to the opening of the centre of the cell. And they loved the centre of the cell, but the bit that really got them, the bit when they kind of went, oh my God, was when we walked over and they looked down and there were all the labs below them. And they said, never seen a lab before, not like that. They kind of went, blimey, is that where all the scientists work? And I said, yeah, and they went, wow, that's so cool. And it was just that experience for them of being right there, being in the place. And, and I just don't think, one can underestimate how powerful that is, and therefore what a great role model, and how excited we are with your future plans for your pod, neuron pod, as it will be. So that's all very good. Lots of really great things have been happening, and I think a lot of people, or you can see a lot of range there, and that's because there's a very diverse public there. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. Now, you may not say this matters, this particular number here, but it is quite interesting. So this comes out of the Wellcome Monitor as well. So we asked people in the Wellcome Monitor about some of the terms that you hear a lot in the media today and that come up a lot. One of them was DNA, one of them was stem cells, and one of them was human genome. DNA, not surprisingly, actually really has entered kind of the public, and then people gave short descriptions and they were really describing it pretty well. People felt quite confident about being able to describe what DNA was. Stem cells, actually, about 25% of people felt, about 1 in 4. So, is that good enough? You're the cell people. Some of you are the cell people. This is the percentage for human genome. I think it matters, actually. You could say, well, you don't know how an aeroplane works, so why does it matter? I think it matters because human genome is actually altogether a bit more personal. And, it is being discussed in terms of one's own health, your family health, the relationship between you and others. You can actually now buy genetic testing kits. And so the idea of actually being able to have a quick understanding, or a quick, if you want to, explain to your children of, well, what is a human genome? We're quite a long way, I think, from people being able to be really comfortable with some of the terms that we bandy around quite easily. This number is an interesting number, and perhaps quite important to you. So this is the number, positively, of young people from the higher social groups who have who regularly do some engagement outside of the classroom around science, sort of in what we would call informal learning. We've just done a major review of informal learning because we fund a lot of it. And it's very clear, there is now some clear evidence to show that those young people that not only have the school education but also have these informal learning opportunities, they have better motivation, better confidence, and crucially higher attainment in scientific STEM subjects. This number is also the number of young people from those lower social groups who have not had those experiences outside of the classroom. And interestingly, there was a report just the other day which sort of mirrors this a little bit, because a lot of these young people also come from quite poor rural and coastal backgrounds, not just inner city backgrounds, where there aren't major universities, where there aren't major conurbations. And I don't know if you saw in the news just yesterday or the other day of the low aspirations and the low achievements that there are now. It's not necessarily so much in the inner cities. It's actually in some of the other places across the UK where we've got a sort of lack of aspiration and almost a sort of lack of access as well. So there is a real issue to be looked at there. And this last one just came out of the Monitor as well, and this is a perennial problem. People have poured money into it, but it hasn't yet been fixed. And this was the percentage of 14 to 16-year-olds who know who know little or nothing about what a career in science might be. So careers in science and careers advice in school generally is not believed to be good. But I think careers advice about science and scientific careers or careers allied to science is very, very poor. And young people they enjoy it, as we saw, but they have no idea of what, they can't picture themselves because they don't know what a career in science might be. And this one was just for Mark. This is my final number. It was just for Mark Warput as he was leaving the Wellcome Trust to go and be the government chief advisor. And that out of the 680, is it, MPs, that is the number that have been a practicing scientist. And I end it there.
Sure. Yeah. So Claire, thank you very much, Claire. That is just absolutely perfect and so inspirational. You know, just completely inspirational, and enormous credit to you because so much of it was your vision. So, some questions for Claire. I'm sure there are some. Yes.
How much do you work with other charities in this field? Because there's lots of charities, and they often agree to speak, who are trying to speak about the particular thing that particular charity is interested in, like multiple sclerosis or Crohn's disease or many, many different things. And sometimes I feel that they're a little bit unprofessional in the way they do things, and I wonder whether you have any interaction with them.
And it varies. Cancer Research UK a huge amount, I suppose, because they're one of the bigger ones, I suppose, and we would do an awful lot with them on an awful lot of things. On the small the public engagement stuff, actually very little. They can come in. Our awards are very broad and open, so they can come in for awards, and some of them do. We've worked with some of the charities for deaf people. And that's been some really interesting work because there's a big issue there around how can people who have all different sorts of sort of hearing impairment, that they want to engage with the science, but they also need the sign language to engage with the science. And the scientific terms develop so fast they need to be able to have the language. So there's been quite a lot of work through the Royal Society and us for that. But actually I would say not as much as you might think. On the policy side, quite a bit, because what we don't have at Wellcome, we don't have patients, and those groups tend to have patients. And so when there's quite a big policy issue, actually, and you want to go down to the House of Commons, you actually want the patient's voice coming through. And so we'll work with small charities on the patient's voice in particular areas. But I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but not a huge amount, not as much as you might think. They're quite specific, sporadic examples. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, actually.
Well, I'm a paediatrician, and one of the things I notice is there's a great opportunity not just to talk about the disease, they all come with their families, and all their brothers and sisters and parents are not patients. And there's an enormous opportunity to talk about science in a general way, not just talk about the disease in question.
Yeah.
Richard.
Claire, that was terrific. Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. There's a remarkable, if you like, disconnect between the acceptance of DNA as a concept and indeed quite well understood. The school kids can draw you a double helix very happily or recognize all the double helixes, but the human genome is a very different concept and one that clearly must be fully understood. And yet there's a real urgency to resolve that because you can't start to have conversations of starting to sequence 100,000 individuals patients in the NHS, which will deliver that very personal bit, not about the structure, but about the impact of business. And I guess it just amplifies. The NHS is going to be able to do that bit of education. It's a question I put back. Wellcome, of course, has driven most of our advances in how we are able to even concentrate on engagement programs, but a huge distance we still have to go.
Yeah, we've been talking about a lot recently about what are there things specifically that we could do that might have an impact, not just kind of little bits and pieces here and there. One of the things that we have identified that we do want to do is if you look at primary schools. It's a major problem in science primary schools anyway, because I think there's a horrible number. It's something like only 14% of primary schools have teachers in them that have science qualifications. So there's an enormous professional development for science need there anyway. But actually, you can start in primary schools with ideas and concepts around human genome, but they need the resources, they need the training. And I think we can do that with, now that we have the National Science Learning Centre, and it's going to work increasingly with primary schools, we can work with scientists, we can work with others to provide the sorts of resources that are needed that can go into schools. So at least starting at that level, that's something real that we could start doing fairly soon. I think when you're thinking about other levels of the population, how you can do that, there's nibbling away at it, which I think we will all do, which is trying to get it into the popular national conversation through various means. If there is any, I think the forensic movement did a lot for DNA, actually, in a funny sort of, through the whole CSI thing, did a lot for people kind of getting and trying to think, okay, well, what is this thing? Didn't do it for human genome, interestingly. So, if there are any good ideas out there around the bigger idea of human genome, we would be interested. But we know that what we definitely can do is we can start building up that resource at the schools level, to give teachers at least the right toolkit to be able to support young people.
So if I may, a sort of preempt conversation we might find ourselves having after this. Of course, you alluded to it, but it's very real for us in the communities that are in our immediate proximity, and that is that some of this evidently has to be tailored in different ways for different communities. And that, I think, is particularly pertinent around the human genome in that context. Just one other comment, which this is not meant to be frivolous at all. You quite rightly point out that understanding of careers in science is not really well understood at school level. Just combining your experience of visit here and seeing folks in the labs, I'm still concerned that the understanding of career in science at postdoctoral level is sort of where it needs to be. And it isn't. I'm not being...
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're right.
There's a question over there. It's the joint centre of the cell question.
I'm quite interested in how much work Wellcome does in touching upon psychological sciences, because my background is in psychology, and I'm personally of the opinion that the engagement of the public in terms of psychological issues is quite behind.
Behind
in terms of, there's not that, I would say that there's limited public awareness of psychological issues, or we are probably a bit behind some of our other sciences.
Right.
So in terms of things like neuroscience, genetics, environment, how that affects you as well, and drugs as well. So
the psychology of those elements, you mean?
Psychology of those elements, and how much, in terms of raising awareness as well of psychological issues as well, and the science behind it, because I think often people don't really understand the science that is actually involved within psychological illnesses, and not only just illnesses, but also all across the spectrum, just differences, psychological variances. So
I mean, the whole side of what you might call sort of mental health, both through sort of from health to illness, actually is one of the most popular areas of engagement in terms of applications that we get in, interestingly. I mean, we could just support projects that relate to those questions. They're not always very good. They don't get supported, mind. But from, if you look outside of the world of science and you look at sort of different types of communicators, broadcasters, artists, etc., that's actually the bit they're really, really interested in. And you sort of slightly have to lead them to other areas of science where they perhaps don't feel they have such a connection. So, our experiences actually, I think, don't quite tally with which is interesting, because we get large numbers of applications which link into much more of that idea of kind of what goes on in the mind than we do in other areas across science.
psychological mental illnesses can still be stigma and it's not funded enough because there are real diseases out there like cancer.
Well, so on the, I mean, interesting. So on the research side, I think there is a very strong sense that that the research around, say, new drugs, around mental health, etc., that there isn't as much money going into it as there is into some of what you might call the more traditional or popular areas, like, sort of cancer, etc. But I was talking about specifically about public engagement applications. So we get very little actually around some of the things like, sort of cancer, but we get a very large number of applications on the public engagement around mental health issues. You would think, but no. I mean, it's partly because we get there are different groups applying, because actually the people that are applying very often, and they might work with a scientist, but applying for some of, say, our arts grants or our people and society grants are not the practicing scientists themselves. They might have a scientist working alongside them. It's kind of what they're interested in. But so that doesn't necessarily reflect where the money is going in terms of the science. And I've not thought about it as a I mean, your point actually does sort of show perhaps there's a slight mismatch of what people are saying they're interested in and where some of the big money is going, in actual fact. But we don't have any problem in finding applications around, and funding applications around neuroscience, mental health, and all of that side of things. But, I mean, I don't know, Fran, I mean, you have a big overview on where big science money goes.
Yeah, I think it's right that it doesn't go so much in terms of mental health and neurological diseases in general. Mike? Sorry.
Yeah, great talk, thank you very much. It's just that figure of 2 million being for Wellcome collections.
Yeah.
And I wondered how much understanding do you have of the sort of demographic of that 2 million? And has that demographic changed over the course of the last 6 years?
Okay, we've got so much information. We probably evaluate ourselves to death, actually. So, we know very, very closely who those people are. So we mark it very strongly as an adult venue. So it's sort of 14 plus. We have a very slightly more female than male audience. It's just tipped to slightly more female. Most people that come are in the sort of 22 to 35 age range. So youngish, but not young teens, slightly old, so very, very young adults, I guess, is our mainstay audience, with a professional interest, not necessarily a scientific job, but a professional interest in health in some shape or form. They will often refer to something that they have there. But as the point I made, what we find is with different, and so that's the sort of the underlying pool of people that come. But we then get huge swathes of different people coming in relation to the topics. So we did, one of our early exhibitions was on war and medicine. And suddenly we got much older men who were sort of Royal Army, Navy, medical corps type people. And they came in groups. We had more tours of these sort of 60-something men in these large groups. And it was fantastic having that group of people coming in and engaging with them. The high society was very interesting. We got more sort of, wacky people, quite often, with quite a strong aroma of, marijuana about them, going through that exhibition. And we did a piece with, oh God, what's his name? The musician. The Pressure On. The Right On talks about political issues. Billy Bragg, thank you.
Yeah,
we did a piece with Billy Bragg, and we got a much younger audience in for that. So it's people are will go to what draws them in, but overall, it's interestingly slightly more female than male. Is that because we're slightly more biology? I don't know.
1, 2, 3. I think I have to stop soon. Maybe 4. 1.
One of the political issues that is arisen in America because of subsidizing the supply side of science is that they've got an oversupply and outrageous. And
the salaries of science graduates in the US are so low now that a lot of them are unemployed. And that's an issue in this country as well. A lot of our PhD graduates just can't cut it. A lot of them just can't find jobs. And that's an issue that needs to be addressed at a governmental level. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry needs to take a lot of scientists that we cancel from this country at a rapid rate. If there isn't a pharmaceutical industry left here. So, if I could encourage you, it's something you should do on the demand side in this country, in terms of where the science is going to go.
Well, I mean, you know, that is really what I mean. One of the things that the Wellcome Trust does in this country is very much try to. It's an interesting balance that we have with government by saying we're not here to substitute what government should be putting in and government should be doing to encourage industries to invest in science. You know, we're here as the extra, and if you, government, don't put the money in, we can actually take our money elsewhere. So there's a you know, one doesn't cry wolf too often, but there is that fine balance, and I think one of the roles of kind of independent organisations like Wellcome is to try to make those sorts of points about the importance of investment in these kind of economy, you know, growing industries. And it's, you know, we do it as best we can.
Thank you very much for the overview. I'd just like to make a comment regarding what you were saying, you know, science as being something cool to do. And I wonder if we should instead switch on something more like science is a job like anything else, that is the brick of society, is the brick of any normal working structure, and making this not something that we should glamorize, like we want to glamorize these days, you know, papers and high-profile journal and so on and so forth, and instead make people understand that we're actually doing an educational and science job. And that goes back to when I was in the US for my postdoc, I worked for autoimmunity. I had my fellowship. After 3 weeks, I was invited by the society that gave me money to have dinner with 6 people with 6 different autoimmune diseases. So you can imagine how I felt from the very beginning with this pressure, you know, that actually I was using money for charity. And so I wonder, you know, if the Wellcome Trust or the Wellcome Collection can make this less of a cool stuff to do and more society and responsibility driven.
No, I mean, and I don't want you to get the impression that that the most important thing is to say science is cool, because actually, and there's all sorts of problems with that anyway. But I do think it's important, if you go back 10 years, actually, you've got to make science lessons interesting. You've got to enthuse and interest young people. You can't run a museum, you can't run a venue if it's actually slightly dull. So, you know, you do have to do those things. But I absolutely agree with you. Part of a really important message in all of this is actually the benefits that investing in the science capital, if you like, it will have for economic growth, for jobs, particularly talking about those messages today. And that's why that 63% is actually quite a worry, because I think we've, for all sorts of reasons, schools now have to provide careers advice. So it's teachers providing careers advice to young people. Teachers don't know very much about careers generally, and they know very little about careers in science. And that's not just going to be a scientist, it's the things that you can use your science for in all sorts of other jobs. So I think there is a real crisis and a real problem actually around careers advice and really good advice for young people in how they can build up their own capital so they can go and get a good job.
Right.
So I agree with you entirely, yeah.
2 more questions, because Claire's been very generous with her time.
It's really
but
fun.
we will be yeah.
I just wanted to know what the future is for the Wellcome, because on the website it says that the exhibition space is changing and year-long exhibitions, and if one was going to sort of suggest something, what's the time frame and how does a year-long exhibition...
Okay, so we're sort of slightly a victim of our own success. So when we opened, we were aiming for around 100,000 visitors. Last year we had just shy of 500,000. And the problem there is, if you've been in recently, all of our visitors getting very fed up because they love the exhibitions, but they can't find anywhere to sit in the cafe, and the toilets are always really busy because they just sort of stay on the first floor and don't go upstairs, and we've got a problem with that building because it's not a good building. You wouldn't start with that building, put it that way. So what we are doing is redevelopment to help people move up the building, much more focus on sort of ground, first and second floor being open to the public, opening up some of our library spaces so you don't have to get through barriers in order to be able to explore the library. The idea of a year-long exhibition, we'll still have the temporary exhibitions downstairs, but we've been doing these big themed exhibitions where we take an idea, take a big theme, and we look at it through many different eyes, many different perspectives. The complaint we always get is it's not really there long enough, and there's far more one could do with that theme and that idea. And so we came up with the idea that on that first floor we would take that idea of the big theme, and we would have a year-long exhibition which would have a core of exhibits within it, but actually would have changing things and also some activity and some discussion and events that go on within the concept. So that will be one gallery, and that will last for a year.
How far in advance with those themes?
4 years.
So something pitched now
Would be in about 6 years' time.
Final question from Rossa at the back there.
Thank you very much for the talk. I wanted to, I think you almost downplayed what seems a huge success, which is you've got 2/3 of children from certain socio-economic groups doing informal science learning outside of the schools. And that's a lot higher, I think we're driving football. I think that's amazing. What are you doing, or what is that you found is so good in that group that we, in the community we're based in, what can we take from that to then?
So that number is not Wellcome Trust, that is a national number, the sort of 2/3, and so that's from some sort of survey work that's recently been done. So I think what that shows actually is that the UK is really good at this stuff. And I travel a lot, I travel to the States a lot, which sort of prides itself on this kind of thing, Europe, Australia. I don't think there is anywhere that I have been where I think there is more innovation or more imagination in terms of that sort of learning outside the classroom stuff. So, we've got what goes on here. We've got Debating Matters, which goes, around and does debates with sixth formers. We've got Why Touring, which travels the country doing performances in schools. We've got, there's a wonderful recently that was between some gerontologists and a fashion group working within a city schools. We do the most extraordinary stuff, and I think that's why we've got those great numbers, because actually there's just real imagination that's going on here. What worries me is actually we can do more and more of it, but unless we think very hard about the hard-to-reach young people, we're doing more and more of it for a group of people, of young people that have lots of it already. And I'm sure they'll love it, and they'll be, they'll be even more inspired. But we're missing out quite a huge swathe of the population, actually, and I think that's the bit that I'm really concerned about. So I think as a nation, we should actually be really proud of what we do in this country around informal science learning centre, and that's about science learning. And I think those reports back in 2000 and 2012 probably did us quite a big service across scientific organisations, a bit of a wake-up call. And you go to the States, and the States, I think, is in a bit of a mess around all this stuff. And I was at MIT recently, and I asked the question, what do they do to encourage and train and help their own scientists to do public engagement? They looked at me as if I'd landed from Mars, because the answer was nothing. It was extraordinary.
Oh, thank you very much, Claire. That was really inspirational. And thank you for